Hello, everyone. This is the Revolutionary Think Tank podcast. This is episode 13. And if this is the first time you're viewing, this is a podcast based on revolutionary thinking, political commentary, and protest music. My name is 4AS, and this is my co host, Mr. E. So, Mr. E, how are you going today?
I am very well, 4IS. How are you?
Yeah, I'm feeling pretty good because we've actually got an interesting episode here today.
Mm.
So, I was actually watching Pixar's Monsters Inc. lately, and based on all of the revolutionary literature we've been reading, you could do a perfect Marxist analysis on it. And yeah, you can actually, like, a lot of the story covers the beats that Marx talks about, or pretty much any of the revolutionary thinkers. And I thought, hey, let's have a discussion about it because it would be very interesting.
Yeah, look, it's a good topic. I've got to admit. I have watched the video and digested the storyline since you suggested it. So great suggestion. It's definitely some hardcore socialist propaganda, that's for sure. Especially when you look at it and interpret it through a Marxist or a socialist lens. There's no going back after you've seen it like that. It's really hard to see it for anything else, but it's propaganda, and it's the good type.
Okay, but before we get into discussion of it, I guess for everyone, we'll do a little bit of a summary of it, just in case you hadn't seen it. But spoilers for a movie that happened back in 2001, if it wasn't already part of your childhood. But yeah, I'll just go into a quick summary of it. So, in the movie, you follow two factory workers. So Sully, who's a scarer at a factory, because in this world, Monstropolis, you actually have scarers that work in factories in order to fuel their energy for what they use, because they actually live on screen power. But you actually are let known in this world how it's been functioning is that there's a bit of an energy crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And in the movie, the way they get these screams is the scarers actually go into children's bedrooms and they scare them where they can actually use these canisters to collect their screams. But during one of during one of the work days that Sully's there, one of the doors is actually left in the factory where a kid named Boo escapes from it. And all of these shenanigans happen where the kids entered the monster's world. And in Monstropolis, or at least this monster world, everyone believes that kids are toxic. And if you interact with them, you will you'll need to be decontaminated. So there's a whole bunch of shenanigans that happen there. But whilst getting to know this kid, Sully and his friend Mike discover that, well, this kid isn't toxic, and they've been told all of these wrong things about human children. But during that process, their boss, Waternoose, finds out that they know about this kid and they know that this propaganda is incorrect. And he basically tries to shut them up by banishing them to the Himalayas. Again, shenanigans ensue, and all of the truth is revealed. Basically, a state bureaucracy known as the Child Detection Agency finds out the truth of this matter, and Waternoose and the board of Monsters Inc. basically get thrown into jail, and they think that the factory is going to close down. But actually, in getting to know Boo, they realize that laugh power, so a child's laughs instead of their screams, is like 100 times more efficient. So Mike and Sully end up pitching that idea to the state bureaucracy, to the CDA. They restart the factory and they seize the means of production. And that's basically the happy ending of the story. And yeah, that's basically where our analysis is going to go in.
And when you say seize the means of production, in that you're basically saying it's the workers end up controlling the factory to an extent.
Yes, because where you're, I guess we'll start with the ending first, is that the CDA step in, they obviously arrest Waternoose, and the factory gets shut down, and you see all the workers walking away, and it's very obvious that everyone's lost their job. And Mike says a line where it's like, well, hey, we had a good run. At least we had a few laughs. And then you notice that Sully goes, oh, we had a few laughs. Because Mike, we know what to do. And then in the very next scene, you see that a bunch of the scarers are dressed up in like clown outfits, and, you know, they're doing all of these clownish things.
And they're ready to go to work, but this time they're harnessing the power of children's laughter.
Yes.
Instead of screams. Yeah.
Because you see Sully in a tie where it's very obvious he's like, him and Mike are the head of the Monsters Inc. Corporation now. And actually, the funny thing, the point I really wanted to make was you could actually make an argument that they're a cooperative, because for those of you who don't know, a cooperative is when instead of shareholders, so hence where, you know, Waternoose in the movie talks about, oh, that he has to talk to the board and everything. That's like a for-profit structure. That's what we're typically relate to in a capitalist system. But in a cooperative, it's actually the workers that are the shareholders and actually own the company. And the fact that Sully and Mike end up being the heads of the corporation, you can make an argument, if you just look at the movie, that it ends up being absorbed by the state bureaucracy, and they put it in the hands of the workers, and it ends up being a Mondragon-esque workers cooperative where they are actually doing a social benefit to the world.
Yeah. So at the really like obvious kind of macro level, that's I guess the Marxist/socialist interpretation. At its most plain and simple, right there. That by the end of the story, the climax, and then when you come to full story arc, you have the owners of the company now being the workers. So they've seen some mean of sort of production. They are happier, and they are kind of, I think it's really good what you pointed out there, how the state bureaucracy steps in, a regulatory authority that has some type of power over the running of the industry, like you would have in any capitalist society. There is state regulation and interference to a certain degree to make sure things are done to a certain standard or as per some type of legislative requirement. But it's the state apparatus that steps in, and like they don't really show this in the movie, but it's, I guess, insinuated that they hand then over the company's operations and management, to the workers. So in true socialist, or definitely Marxist analysis, or an understanding of how socialism will come about, you have the state working for the proletariat, working for the working people, and being the tool of the workers in order to deliver socialism. And socialism in this very direct interpretation is when workers own the means of production. So they're not seizing it through some type of class struggle in this case. They're being handed it to them by the state because they've obviously found a way to work things more efficiently and more appropriately, given the fact that there is an energy crisis, which is something that I really thought was interesting coming out of this movie, because there's just layers upon layers upon layers of things that we could just dissect here. It's just, I guess, how much time we got to sit here and chinwag. But the idea that someone who is working with means of production of the proletariat, a worker, let's say, someone at the coalface, literally, you know, if we want to borrow some industrial revolution terminology, somebody who's working on the means of production at all times, like Sully and Mike, who have discovered that it's not screen power being the only way to fuel the city, Monstropolis. There is an alternative energy source from the same source. You can just extract something more efficiently with 10 times the power or whatever, and that's laugh. But that innovation, that understanding comes from a worker, as opposed to some manager sitting in office somewhere, someone on the board of directors, or some bourgeoisie representative who's just like, this is how we're going to increase productivity, and it's like, let's just slash jobs and make them all just work harder, and then we'll increase profits and productivity that way. But it's actually people that are dealing with the resource, dealing with the means of production on a daily basis, and they figure out, because of their interaction with it, that they can do it better. They can make it, they can improve the system. And so you have that feedback loop happening on the working person's level, because that's the thing about, I guess, Marxism or socialism as a whole. There is a sense of dignity in the work itself, because there's a large part of the Marxist critique of capitalism, a socialist critique of the industrial system, is that it alienates the worker and it deprives them of any ownership in the process. And so the fact that two workers come up with a way that not only revolutionizes the way that they harness energy, but also saves Monstropolis, that's some socialist / Marxist kind of, la-di-da kind of happy ending kind of stuff right there. It's good to see how that's kind of, I guess, developed through the storyline, because, as you noted before, humans are toxic at one point. They're valuable, but they're toxic, and then they end up being, so lovely to be around, that in order to really enjoy them at their best potential, or manipulate them at their best potential, you have to exist in a happy and kind of comfortable space with them. It's complete change and a complete juxtaposition from where you start off. Very, very interesting.
Yeah, because I guess what's interesting about this is this was in 2001. So this movie, like basically talking about energy crises and basically transitioning to different energies. This is way before Al Gore's Inconvenient Truth. So, this has huge talking about, and huge talking points about energy crises, climate change, and Monsters Inc. was fundamentally way ahead of its time. But I think another point, obviously you can talk about energy crises and climate change with this, but it's surprising for somebody that's ends up being part of the Disney machine. This is surprisingly anti-capitalist, because basically at the height of the movie, when Waternoose is basically trying to shut down Sully and Mike from exposing these truths, you actually find that him and one of Sully and Mike's co-workers, Randall, are actually working on this new machine, this automated machine called the extractor, where basically what it does is it holds down a kid. It basically straps them into this device where the device goes up until their lips and extracts screams from them. So not only is it alienating the work of the average worker who's a screamer, it's like almost making them redundant, but it's also dehumanizing everyone that's kind of involved. So it's almost saying that even when capitalism works at its efficient, it completely dehumanizes everyone within the process. And it's surprising that in a kind of Leninist way, it ended up what ends up happening is the Child Detection Agency, or this state bureaucracy, ended up having to step in and say, no board, no Mr. Wardenus, what you're doing is wrong. We're going to shut you down unless there's a better alternative. And it just so happens that Mike and Sully start a cooperative. I'm just going to wed myself to this idea that they start a cooperative. That they start a cooperative, and they end up showing the world, the Monstropolis, that yes, indeed, laugh power is 100 times better. You should invest in this. Invest in this idea, and they end up training and skilling up their fellow monsters, and they end up creating a successful business.
Yeah, it's very like a couple of things there, like, you know, the idea, I guess, of Randall, the proletariat, the worker that kind of ascends from the ranks of the workers to kind of, I guess, work or join forces, if you will, with the bourgeoisie, the managerial class, and the I guess the owners and the captains of industry and such. So that's a very kind of Marxist/Leninist, if you want to go into that kind of talking point there, how you have opportunists within the working class, within the proletariat, or within the majority of the population, who will, sacrifice their own brethren, their own class interests, in order to pander to those in power and stuff like that. And Randall kind of exemplifies that part of the struggle and of revolution. It's not just going to be this kind of two-class struggle kind of system. There are going to be multiple, or there's going to be instances where there are people from the proletariat, from the working class, that betray their own class interests and betray their own people in order to get ahead and to try and make the world a better place for at least themselves. Just completely stepping on everyone that they've ever grown up with, as you would probably see if you know from the following movies. Randall is not a random character at all. Mike's and Sully, I guess, are very much intertwined with him. They all went to college together and all that sort of stuff, so they've known each other for a long time, and they end up kind of, while they don't have a good relationship, he does betray his class interests. And that's a big talking point in revolutionary theory, especially in, I guess you could call, Leninist kind of discussion, is having someone in there that, is an opportunist and will degrade the effort and the power struggle, or the political struggle between the two classes. Very, very interesting that you brought up Randall, because he's a very good kind of element to have in there, and he adds a lot of flavor to the story. He's scary. He can disappear and camouflage himself, so he can literally, become part of another class, and is unperceptible to the working class beyond that. And he works in the shadows, and he has the bourgeoisie's full support and all of their resources at his disposal. And so like there's another thing that you talked about in there, which was like how they're using a technological innovation, which is that machine that sucks screams right out of the source, as opposed to having workers with some type of skill doing the scaring on the scare floor and all that sort of stuff. You just, take a child out fully knowing that they're not toxic. So that must be part of the propaganda machine to keep the workers in place and keep society functioning as how it is. But like you take the child out, you strap them into a seat and you extract screams out of them artificially. Now that is a big part of Marxist analysis of capitalism. Like there's massive parts of Das Kapital that are devoted to the idea of technological change being this massive driving force in capitalism and a massive disruptive agent to the working class. So like you don't have the stability of work and wage work and all that sort of stuff in the capitalist system, because there is forever a need for technological innovation for capitalists to stay on top of the game. And by doing that, they're always rubbing out huge parts of the working class. And every time there's a new technological innovation that comes along, you hear people talking about it all the time today. It's AI. It's like this new technology is just going to make this whole section of the working force redundant. And that's what they're working in the shadows and breaking all the rules of Monstropolis and how you interact with humans and stuff. It doesn't matter because they've got some new technology that they're going to experiment with and hopefully roll out, which is going to save the company and save us all from the energy crisis. But really, it's just their sinister way of trying to get on top of or surmount the competition or surmount whatever issues they're trying to deal with. But technology and its change and advances in technology are a huge and massively disrupting factor in Marxist analysis of capitalism. And it's constantly displacing the workforce. But like by doing that, like if we want to dig a little bit deeper into like surplus value theory and all that sort of stuff, surplus value, the value actually comes from the worker. It's the scarers that are on the floor extracting the stream out, which is producing the stuff that the capitalists are surviving off, the bourgeois monsters in that boardroom are going to survive off and stuff like that. And so once you start taking the workers out of the picture and you just rely on technology, you reduce your profit in the end, because your profit comes from surplus values. So like, it's interesting that you have this one machine that's going to replace this whole workforce of people, but to what end? It might make scream production amplified. It might give them access to more resources, but when you have less of a workforce, they will have less surplus and less profit. The profit ratio or the amount of profit that they'll get from the enterprise will diminish over the long run. And so capitalism has this self-defeating element built into it, a contradiction, as Marx would say. And it's beautifully, beautifully defined in that moment where you see this little screen machine and they're abducting children to experiment on it. And it ends up getting used on Mike Sully, which ends up being it's a little bit scary, but also a funny scene at the same time. So they crafted it well.
Yeah, I think this might be a good moment to kind of step back a bit, because I think what's interesting about Waternoose and at least the conversation of how this movie frames capitalism as well is probably how it views capitalism from probably the beginning to the middle of the movie. Because for a majority of the movie, Waternoose, as the CEO, isn't a bad guy, because it's really only until like the final third of the movie that you realize that he's the bad guy. It's basically Randall for a majority of the movie. And it's interesting because in the movie they frame at least the bad side of capitalism in very subtle ways. So at least the first way that they do it is the fact that the very opening scene, when you see Mike and Sully, they're listening to the news, or at least the news is in the background, and you're being told that there's an energy crisis. And basically that the screen factories are working nonstop to make sure that they compensate for this low energy, well, for this energy crisis. So already you can kind of see the similarities to, the fossil fuel industry, and basically an industry that is basically perpetuate sorry perpetuating itself. The old Albert Einstein adage of insanity is doing the same thing but expecting a different result. And not only do you have that, but the whole talk around the whole talk around kids being toxic. And there's a very specific scene that I know it's played for laughs, but one of the scarers accidentally gets a sock on them, and one of the workers screams out, "Oh, it's a 2219! It's a 2219!" Yeah. And that's when the CDA jumps in and basically like shaves off this monster that's a monster that's naturally has fur, and then like completely decontaminates him, which is very interesting because this sort of propaganda is basically influences how the state bureaucracy works. I think that's a very interesting point. But also, to kind of round out the trifecta, is in the early stages of the movie, there's a very specific scene where Sully is speaking to Mr. Waternoose, and Mr. Waternoose basically says something similar to, "Oh, the new crop of scarers, they just stink. They kind of don't make scarers like they used to. Like, Sully, you're my best scarer. Why can't they be more like you and work harder?" Like he has this error to him where it sounds like, "Oh, I wish it was the good old days," but when you actually listen to what he's saying, it has that very conservative view of, well, we're in the middle of a crisis. Why can't my workers work harder for the benefit of society, for the benefit of my profit line? Like it's got this very pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And that is reinforced by the very fact that in the very next scene, we obviously see a typical day of how the factory works. And the scarers go on the scare floor, and there's a leadership board. And they're all competing against each other to get as much screen power as they can. So not only are they have this kind of bourgeoisie mentality put on them of, well, you just need to work harder, you just need to be more productive, but also there's literally, they are competing against each other, which is a classic capitalist mindset on the proletariat.
Yeah.
So it's very interesting.
Yeah. I think they've done the levels incredibly, like the layers upon layers in this. Like even like Waternoose down to his physical appearance. Like, he's got like a jacket and like a vest, like with the waistcoat and stuff like that, which is like, he's just missing like a monocle and like a cigar, really. I'd like maybe holding like one of those whiskey tumblers or something like that, which I guess they couldn't do in a kid's movie, but like, if they really could have, I'm sure they would have put a top hat and a cane on him as well. Like he's just stereotypically or aesthetically bourgeois, and in his rhetoric and his outlook on life, his ideology, like you were saying, is incredibly bourgeoisie. So, like, he talks about, the business being in the family for 3 generations or something like that. That is like that's a hardcore industrial capitalist kind of mentality, like my father and my father's father kind of started this business from scratch. I'm here as part of that incredible industrial lineage, and this is my company kind of thing. And I need the workers to work like they did back in the good old days to bring us back to that super profit golden age that we used to have. So, kind of we just dominated this part of whatever industry it is. And so not until you actually look at, I guess, the movie with that lens, are you really just picking it from all over the place, kind of like how much of a Marxist and slash socialist piece of propaganda this is. And so the question has to be asked then in all of that. And I know we're not finished our analysis yet, but it really begs the question is this a piece of socialist slash Marxist propaganda that was slipped in somehow to, it's Pixar, isn't it? Pixar's.
Oh yes, and I would almost argue that this was probably before the merger that Pixar had with Disney, because I'm sorry, I just can't imagine this tale being told after Pixar merged with Disney, because the basically the when you think of capitalism, you think of McDonald's, you think of Disney, like it's the big conglomerates that control everything. And this story had to be told beforehand and before that merger. And to be honest, it's a story that really it was the early days of Pixar, so I could see that whoever, like, I haven't done my research in the sense of who the founders of Pixar are, but it makes me wonder whether they were at this stage, I don't know, a bunch of college students that have just come out.
Yeah, they're having a laugh and taking it on because they've gotten away with absolute murder here. Like in terms of like Hollywood and like media, in terms of like films and stuff like that, that is a major vehicle or a major part in the propaganda model. And in terms of manufacturing consent and all that sort of stuff, Hollywood plays a massive, massive role in disseminating ideas that support the prevailing ideology of the ruling class in like Western society and stuff like that. I'd like to slip this one in is to really get something past the keeper here, because like this is choice socialist propaganda. Like it's up there with like all the Arnold Schwarzenegger movies where he's just like blowing up and killing South American kind of guerrilla fighters in jungles and stuff like that. It's up there with that type of CIA propaganda that they had in the 80s. To help spread capitalism and degrade the evil kind of communist movements that are happening all around the third world and stuff like that. It's up there. It's as good as an Arnold Schwarzenegger movie where he's just blowing stuff up because he just kicks ass kind of thing. But this is like proletariat style, like, and for children. So like you have a generation of people that have grown up and just been like, I feel for these people, man. Like, and like we could do that. And like we can make the world a better place, and we can, maybe take over a business and have it run more ethically and run it in more of a heartwarming way, and like solve the problems of the world, like energy crisis and all that sort of stuff. It grapples with some big issues, but like, every direction you turn, it's just absolutely littered with Marxist interpretations.
And see, the thing is, I don't think it kind of just ends with a Marxist interpretation. And this, I want to come back to the idea of the extractor. And the last point I've got there on the PowerPoint slide is it kind of neatly runs into, because I've actually been reading Mariana Mazzucato's book, The Value of Everything. The extractor actually neatly goes into her book because she does a massive analysis on capitalism and how value creating corporations like your Teslas, your basically you're like Apple, all of these companies that are for-profit companies that view themselves as innovators within the market, that really they're actually just extracting value. They're not creating value. And what she talks about is ideas such as what she calls casino capitalism. So this is basically the companies like your Goldman Sachs and like your hedge funds that were around right before the global financial crisis, that were basically speculating with money and convincing people to have mortgages that they couldn't afford to pay back, and basically using all of this speculation. They market themselves as innovators, but really they aren't. They kind of they basically extract value by patents, by basically taking control of these products. So let's say for example, the idea of Wi-Fi. Now, Wi-Fi isn't actually an Australian invention. It was actually fronted by the CSIRO, which was a government entity within Australia, like a government body. Now, that government body, CSIRO, they did plenty of testing with Wi-Fi, any of these sort of like innovations. It's actually the public sector, it's the government that does all the testing. They put all the research, the innovation, the research and development into it. And then what will end up happening is you'll have your internet providers, your ordinary ones. Before Wi-Fi came about, obviously it would have been, dial-up or, putting direct connections into your house in order to have internet. But as soon as Wi-Fi came about, what ends up happening is, well, the CSIRO and the Australian government, they're public servants. They're not in it for a profit. So what will end up happening is a company will take that patent to that technology, then they will commodify it and then sell it as a product. And then what ends up happening is the next big internet company then would take Wi-Fi and then sell it to the highest bidder. And then it gets reappropriated as innovation when really they're kind of just extracting that value. So I think what's good about Monsters Inc. is that what is shown as innovation is really, taking the profits or taking the screams from the children that end up being the profits, and marketing as innovation when really they're just extracting energy or extracting value from children and selling it as a nice thing when it really isn't.
Yeah, look, it's a very interesting concept on extraction as opposed to value creation and like leeching off things, like especially like innovation in terms of research and development from a government-funded organization or a public institute like a university or something like that, which is subsidized and propped up by public money and expenditure. And you have all of these like corporations and capitalists just like hanging in the winds as soon as they've kind of developed some new technology that's just going to change the game, for lack of a better word. They all just swoop in and like they feed off it and they take basically that knowledge and that understanding for free, and they develop all of their technology, their associated technology around that, and benefit from that incredibly, and never pay a goddamn thing in terms of patents or some type of even acknowledgement of the fact that that was all the costs, the upfront costs of that, which is the most costly part of research and development, are completely burdened or done by the taxpayer and by the public, and they just feed off it like some type of feeding frenzy, and they basically extract the value from that thing, whatever it is, that technological advancement or that achievement, and they do nothing of themselves and of their own volition to produce that value in the first place. But like you touched on something that I think we definitely need to cover, because like it's paramount to the entire story, but like it's everybody's sentimental favorite in this movie is Boo. And what does Boo represent from a Marxist perspective? Now, like some people I think would argue differently to me about what it is that Boo represents, and all children in the Monsters Inc. universe. But for me, children represent means of production.
Yeah.
From a Marxist analysis, means of production are the things that allow you to produce commodities by taking some commodities and turning them into surplus commodities, so then you can then make your profit on that and all that sort of stuff. And children are a resource which at one point scream to make energy, and then at a later point laugh to make energy that fuels the system and all that sort of stuff. So they might not be fixed capital, so they're not like a machine that's stuck on the floor or a warehouse that can't be taken and moved in time, but they still are constant capital, which is another concept of Marx, that you have constant capital or variable capital. So your constant capital are things that are like commodities that you pay for their value in. So like if you want to make chairs, you pay for like, I don't know, you pay for $200 of timber and $100 worth of nails and glue, and then you make your chairs and all that sort of stuff. The variable capital is the money you spend on workers, because workers will produce stuff, but you don't pay them really for their actual value that they create. You just pay them a wage, and then everything else they make on top of that is yours to take away. So I think children are part of, constant capital. They take them from the world. I guess they're not paying for them though, but like they take them from the human world and they extract value from them or transfer the value out of them to make in their energy production, however they actually use the screams. They bottle them up in the movie. I don't know how they actually turn that into power. I guess that doesn't need much of an explanation. But to me, children, Boo especially, they represent the means of production. And the big question in this movie when it comes to the means of production, which is pertinent to the energy crisis and the debate on sustainable energy use and all that sort of stuff. The big question about children is, one, are they being used ethically? But two, and I think more importantly, are they being used the most efficiently? And it is, like I said before, the workers who innovate and find a way to use the means of production in a way that increases their output by tenfold in the end. But like from a Marxist analysis and standpoint, you have the means of production, a factory, a building, the resources that go into producing whatever product it is, the means of production, and a child in this world is means of production to me. They're cute, don't get me wrong, and they are living, but they're a resource.
There's also one other aspect of at least scream power versus laugh power that we can probably touch on this as the children as the means of production is one subtle thing that they do touch on in the first, day working in the factory that we see is that when they are extracting scream power, or at least getting scream power, it is an incredibly antagonistic process. Like, not only is, the monster going in and scaring the kid and obviously getting the screams from them, we're actually shown that, like, oh, hey fellas, we're on the eastern seaboard today, so we're actually shown that they can only scare kids and like have them on a rotation for a certain period, because if they were to do it too often, this process wouldn't work. And it's incredibly antagonistic where you can only exploit that means of production or that resource for a certain amount of time, and you have to move somewhere else in the human world so you don't expose yourself as a monster. Because I guess what it's tying into is that aspect of, obviously the kid would rush to their parents and say, oh, mummy and daddy, a monster scared me last night. And if the kid had recurring like concerns about this, then you would feel like the parents would become concerned as well. Whereas if it only happens once in a while, the parents can kind of brush it off. But when it comes, and of course I'm coming back to the whole idea of a cooperative, if you talk about laugh power, and you dispel the idea that kids are toxic, because, at least in the scream power aspect of it, if kids are toxic, you can kind of have that antagonistic ideal. You can have the monsters scare the kids, then they can basically go in and go out and there's no interaction. But when you have laugh power, they obviously need to establish a rapport with the kid. They need to make them laugh. So what's great about the laugh power is that it's as the name denotes, it's incredibly cooperative. So not only are you creating more value that's like 100 times better, as the movie states, but you're actually sitting down with the kid and making the process a lot more efficient, where you probably wouldn't have to skip certain sections of the world after you've created value with them, because you could probably go back to the same house with the same kid like several times in a week, because as we find out in the movie, Mike ends up being a comedian. He's really good at getting laughs, even though Sully was a good scarer.
Yeah.
And you see that when he actually goes in and tells the jokes to the kid, you get the sense that he's quite familiar with Mike.
Yeah.
And you just see like little hints of efficiencies that are already established in this new normal of laugh power. And it's very interesting. It kind of ties into that Marxist propaganda.
There's a big element in Marx's kind of theory that, capitalism is incredibly predatory in terms of its resource consumption. It's very resource driven in terms of how it needs to feed off eternal markets and stuff like that. And it basically destroys them as it goes. And so like that idea that screams are completely detached from the person, and like they even complain in the movie about having to destroy doors because children aren't as scared as easily anymore and stuff like that. So there's a complete detachment from the resource there. You go in and you consume it to almost to its end or its exhaustion at that point in time, and you might have to come back to it later after it's replenished itself. And if it's used to a point beyond replenishment, then you actually have to destroy it, and you leave that place basically waste and barren, and you can never return to it again. That's a big Marxist critique of capitalism. And so I guess a more socialist or a more progressive answer to that is the laughter side of things, where you were saying before, instead of going in and exploiting an environment like you would in a capitalist kind of system, you could go in and build a rapport with that environment and set up a system that's more sustainably used. That's a big kind of question about, can we actually do that properly? And, I think Marxists and socialists would always question whether or not resources can be used more efficiently, or a better relationship can be established with resource bases instead of just the way that global capital just goes in. It's just this massive destructive force, burning down the Amazon or something, for example, or completely laying waste to certain massive areas of pristine environmental and ecosystems and all this sort of stuff to get access to lithium or oil or gas or what have you. So I think that's a very deep and another interesting layer that can be explored in this movie. I'm conscious of the time.
Yes. I think this is probably a good time to wrap it up. The only final thing that I'll mention is the synthwave art in the background. Probably the best one we've had yet. You basically see a tentacle kaiju monster. And as the title of this PowerPoint is, I just typed in Marxist Monsters Inc. and it gave me that. So I'll definitely put it up on my page so people can have a look. So with that, we'll wrap this one up, Mr. E. Just remember, everyone, to keep thinking and keep learning. And I'll pass it over to you, Mr. E.
Thank you very much for us. And for all of you out there, please remember, I am, you are, we are a mystery